Continuing with our investigative theme for this afternoon, we're going to talk about hiding assets in a bankruptcy. This is Dave again at AFX Search, licensed investigators in Palm Beach, Florida, and elsewhere. So you're going into a bankruptcy, or somebody is, and the subject of hiding assets from the bankruptcy trustee or to keeping them out of creditors comes up. Well, it may sound tempting. If you're a debtor and you have some assets that may not have to be reported, real estate, obviously it's in your name. You can't hide that. Most vehicles, they're titled in your name. What about cash? What about valuable items such as jewelry? Do you want to hide those things? Well, there's a lot of risk involved. Think about who's running a bankruptcy. It's the federal government. U.S. Bankruptcy Court, federal government runs a bankruptcy. The bankruptcy trustee is a federal officer. Remember, the federal government is the one who goes after narcotics traffickers. And narcotics traffickers are notorious for trying to hide assets. Look, that's their living. They have to hide the money that they get from dealing drugs. Otherwise, the government's just going to grab it. So the government knows all the ways to get money and assets from advanced asset concealment schemes used by multi-hundred-million-dollar narcotics traffickers. Do you think that the techniques that will be used by bankruptcy debtor might not be up to the same level of a narcotics trafficker? So you need to be good not just at hiding it. Hiding the money is just the beginning of keep concealing assets from a bankruptcy. That's just a start. You not want to rely on just hiding the assets. Obscurity equals insecurity. What does that mean? Well, if you have assets that are in public, that are documented and titled, that makes them very secure. You have money in the bank, that's a secure place to have money, but it's very obvious. You have a bank account statement, it's reported. You have a real estate, that's very secure. No one can, really steal your real estate, but it's very public. It's documented, it's titled. If money is obscure, if you have a wad of cash in your pocket, the only one who knows about that wad of cash in your pocket is you. It's very obscure, but it's also very insecure. You can get robbed. If you dig a hole in your backyard and you hide $10,000, it's very obscure because no one knows about it unless you tell them. It's also very insecure because it can be stolen if it's known about or discovered. So one of the things about hiding assets is it has to be obscure because you don't want everybody to know about it. You don't want it to be public. But that, by definition, makes it insecure. Let me tell you about a few of the examples of hiding assets in bankruptcy that we've seen over the past decades, all of which have been found by the federal government or creditors. We talked about burying money. Clients who want to take cash, jewelry, precious metals, bury them somewhere in the backyard. They've been found. And the reasons they've been found we'll get into. Another example is poker chips. You go to a casino, you buy a bunch of chips, you gamble a little bit, you say you lost all the money, but you really have all the chips in a briefcase and you hide them somewhere. We had one subject we were investigating that actually hid them in a briefcase, that they went scuba diving and hid them under a coral reef at certain GPS coordinates, figuring they wouldn't be found. Guess what? They were found. Another subject took and claimed on his bankruptcy financial statement that he just had some used furniture in his house, which he did, and they allow you to keep a certain percentage. Turns out it was all very valuable European antiques worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Guess what? They found it out. Not only that, but he ended up going to prison for bankruptcy fraud for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Another subject literally flew cash out from his jurisdiction on a plane and hid it somewhere. That was discovered. Every time you go on an aircraft, private or public or chartered, it's just going to be a manifest of who's on the plane and what was brought on, and if you have more than a certain amount of money, it has to be documented. Well, pilots don't like to jeopardize their pilot's license over something that a passenger is doing, so the pilot noticed what was there and reported it, and that got covered. These were all caught, and eventually they are going to be caught, because even if you get the asset or money to the place where you think it's safe, at some point you have to move it again. And we have to move it back into the real world. When you do that, if you do it all at once, it's a lot of money. If you hide even $50,000, it's a lot of money to bring back from the dead all at once. And when you do that, you either have to put a lot of security on it, or it's a kind of a big event. If you do it a little bit at a time, it's small amounts, but it's multiple events, and any one of those can be discovered, and more of them increases the odds it's going to be discovered. And remember, this is a federal felony. Some of these have been caught 7, 8, 9 years later. It's usually not worth it to hide money from a bankruptcy because it's more than likely going to be discovered. Let me tell you about the poker chips deal. What happened was the guy went to go down to get his poker chips, and he went under the pretense of spearfishing. And so he had a spearfish gun, and he had some bags to put the gear in, and he went down there to try to get these poker chips and put them in the bag and hide them with some fish. The problem is, couldn't open up the briefcase because the coral had encrusted it closed. So he just put the whole briefcase in his bag. But it was obvious that that briefcase wasn't a fish. The boat charter guy picked up on it and thought it was something suspicious. He actually thought it was drugs. And the cops were waiting for him when he got back to the dock. So even if you're going to say, I'm not going to use that technique, the bottom line is that hiding assets is a activity. It creates a paper trail. It creates footprints. Bringing the assets back create footprints. Even using the assets after you get them back. If you're bankrupt and 2 or 3 years later you start throwing money around and you buy property, or you're going out and spending $100 on dinner, somebody's going to ask where that money came from, and you have to be able to document it. And if you tell another lie when you describe where the money came from, it's a new crime, and it also extends the tolling of limitations on that original crime, and it could be a serious problem. These are federal felonies, and the government will also use all the techniques it uses against narco traffickers to find your money. Worst case scenario, if you legitimately have a situation where you don't think you have assets and you think that you're legit with the bankruptcy and you want to do a means test or an advanced audit, and a good investigator can investigate you just like the government would to see if any of your assets are hanging out where they can be seen, or if any of your activities are red flags for asset concealment, and give you a report in advance of your bankruptcy just to make sure you're clear, so that the bankruptcy trustee is not going to look unfavorably upon your petition. Because if they do, they can dismiss the petition instead of discharging it, which means you still owe all your money to the creditors.